needs no introduction, but Dalit and trans rights activist and force to be reckoned with. And I'll hand it over to Grace now.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. And thank you for Jaina and team. Yes, this is the closing panel. So we have to thank everybody who are involved in this conference. And yes, and this is the safe space for trans people. I think I remember some person asked me, um, I'm doing yeah, as Vikram said, I'm doing so much the naughty things. So because we are feeling this is a safe space for all the people. And dear allies, you should learn from the Jaina how to be an ally. So yeah, let's start the this panel is gender at work. Yeah, we have Adam Hari, and we have Anubhuti, and we have Anindya Hajra. So now let's talk about the gender at work. So I'm yes, Adam, you should talk.
Hi, friends. I'm a little bit nervous, but it's okay. I'm here to talk about an auto-ethnographic account of education and employment trajectories of transgender people in India, titled Closed Door of Opportunities. So, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me for this wonderful discussion, wonderful program, and I'm so privileged to be a part of this. Uh, so mostly I will be talking about my personal experiences. As we all know, after Transgender People's Protection Right Act came in law, this act prohibits the discrimination against transgender people, including unfair treatments and denial of services in relation to education, employment, health, and access to goods and facilities. But still, as a trans person, I know we all are experiencing uh, difficulties, problems in every day of our life. Also, back in Kerala, um, they just recently started using the term transgender to address transgender people. Before they used this term Muna Lingam, which is third gender in English, and also Binna Lingam in Malayalam to address transgender people, even in media. Uh, but now still they are using it to address transgender people. Even though the term transgender was aroused in mid 1990s, I believe we trans people have existed in every race, class, and society since the human race has been recorded. History of human race has been recorded. Uh, yeah. So in India, there are a lot of LGBTQI movements happened in recent years, but still there are a lot more to do in fight to get our equality and rights. So, first of all, I would like to talk about the issues that trans people are facing in educational institutes. I will say that transgender people, in particular transgender students, are continuously being unrecognized by the successive government and policy makers. Giving a separate column for gender to tick in doesn't solve all of our problems. There are a lot of problems that faced by transgender students. Kerala is hailed as a transgender friendly state. We have 2% of reservation for transgender people in every colleges for graduation courses, but still the number of dropping out is higher than the number of admissions. So people are dropping out their courses because of continuous bullying, harassment from their educational institutes. uh, I have this personal experience back in 2016 when I was studying in school. uh, my friends always treated me differently. I was at that time I was exploring my gender identity. I used to express my gender identity when I was studying in school. So these people treated me like an alien. They don't even talk to me. They don't sit next to me. They don't touch me. as if I have a disease. Even my teachers made me to sit separately because I was more inclined to express masculinity back in those days. And also, I recall an incident in my during my school days that I was a part of National Service Scheme Unit. I was an NSS volunteer, and one day my trainer said that I am expelled from NSS for no reason, and he said that they don't want this kind of people in our NSS unit, and he used an offensive term, "ആണും പെണ്ണും കെട്ടത്," and if you're a girl, be like a girl. That's what that was he said. And if you are expressing my gender identity like as my assigned sex, then he said he will consider it. So that's a painful experience that I had in my school days. Still, there are a lot of students, trans students, facing these issues. And after a few years, the same trainer in NSS invited me to inaugurate the NSS function, and I took gender sensitization classes for those students. And but unfortunately, he didn't apologize for what he did. But I thought, oh, anyway, they invited me for this program. I was so happy and proud to be a part of the program because that organization rejected me once. And when I got recognized, when I got this visibility, they invited me for this program. But it was not that reality. The government, it was mandatory to invite a transgender person for NSS program by there was a from the government, they told that it is mandatory for the transgender person to conduct sensitization classes. So they don't know any other transgender person in person, so that's why they called me. uh, yeah, also uh, in Kerala, many friends of mine dropped out during their graduation courses. Even for example, yesterday, her name is Rantoni was talking about Calicut Medical College anti-ragging policy. Calicut Medical College is the first medical college to pass and implement an anti-ragging policy. But in the same college, recently trans woman came out, and in Idaho Day, I was a part of their Google Meet, and these students, more of them, they are saying that they are not comfortable in sharing a space with a trans woman. So also, yeah, as Aksa said, in their even in the curriculum of medical students, they are studying as a like they are learning many offensive things about trans and queer people. As they have, there is a forensic textbook, they have mentioned it as a lesbianism as a perversion there, and they believe that people become lesbian if they stay together in a hostel, women's hostel, if they study together in a girls only school. They have mentioned that this is the reason to become a lesbian. That's how it's written in the forensic medicine textbook. And also there, uh, those students are very phobic. They celebrate Pride Month. They conduct trans friendly welfare programs for transgenders. They claims that it is a transgender friendly campus. They have queer club in their college, but internally they are phobic. They want to show the public that they are progressive by celebrating Pride, by posting pictures in Instagram during the Pride Month, but they treat the students very badly. And also, to pertaining to our identity can be addressed. Solution in educational system and in our curriculum will lead to the transition of a transition in mainstream social perception. That's what I believe. And also, when it comes to employment, we trans people face a lot of discrimination from the workplace. I can say there was a research done by National Human Rights Commission. It says that 96% of transgender people are denied job, even they are qualified for the job. And also 79 percentage of transgender people are living in shared rooms or rented rooms. They are earning only salaries below 10,000 rupees, so they cannot afford the cost of the hostel and rented houses. And also most of the landlords doesn't even give them space to stay in Kerala. As a progressive movement, our metro hired 23 transgender people as for temporary vacancy under the organization Kudumbashree. They hired them, and most of them quit their job because they were earning less than 8,000, I think 8,000 rupees, and in a place like Kochi, they cannot even afford the price of the accommodation. So most of them quit their job and they went for sex work and other jobs. So this is the reality in our um, uh, in, in employment sector in everywhere in India. Also, we don't have reservation in government sector and private sector, and I think only few percentage of people are working with private sector and NGOs. So we need to find a solution to overcome this scenario. And also, I want to share some experiences of mine as well. Uh, I'm a trans man and I'm a trainee pilot. So in India, there are a lot of people who hold the first transgender tags, like first transgender professor, first transgender doctor, first transgender lawyer. There are a lot of people who hold this tag, but these people are facing a lot of issues in their workspace. For example, Manobi Banobhatyay, she was the professor in a college, and she quit her job due to the mistreatment from her own colleagues. She was not even able to use toilets. They didn't had a gender neutral toilets. And there are a lot of people like Shabi. Shabi got fired from Navy for revealing her gender identity. Still, she is fighting in the court for her rights. And when it comes to aviation, there are a lot of people still fighting for their rights. I know two people in person. One is Myra Bantaliga. She's the first air traffic controller and she is working in Mumbai airport. Mumbai is the busiest airport. But still, when she revealed her identity, they denied her medical and she fought for it, and finally the court agreed her to join back to her work. Sometimes they don't even give her the job to give instructions for the pilot, the like as an ATC, but they give her some other jobs in the airport. So she felt really uncomfortable and she have to do medical tests in uh, in every 6 months. For cis people, it's they just have to do the medical test in 2 years and 1 year. But for her, they made her to do the test in every 6 months. And there is another person, Shanvi Punuswamy. Air India denied her job when she revealed her identity, and she even filed a petition for mercy killing. After that, it was the only uh, earning for her, and they denied her job. She applied for jobs in 20 companies. Everybody denied her job. Then finally Air India appointed her for the ground as a ground staff. Then when she transitioned and applied for a job in Air India, our own airline, our government's airline, denied her job. Yeah. And in my case, I'm a transgender person, and when I revealed my identity, when I applied for the course, luckily I got admission. I got the scholarship from Kerala government to continue my commercial pilot license. I was born in an Orthodox Muslim family, and I went for pilot training when I was 17 years old to South Africa. And at that time, I revealed my identity. I came out as a trans man. Then my parents stopped my paying my fees, and I dropped out. At that time, I had my private pilot license. Then I came back to India. I was house arrested for an year, and they took me through a lot of invisible correction therapies, and physically and mentally they abused me. and I had no other option other than running away from my home. At the age of 19, I ran away from my home and I found myself shelter at railway stations and bus stand. I didn't had anything because my parents burned all my clothes and they destroyed my phone. So at first I didn't had any option. My mother gave me 500 rupees and she said, just run away anywhere, otherwise they are going to kill you, because my family was ashamed of my gender identity. So for weeks, I used to wear the same dress and stayed in railway stations. And um, luckily, I got a job in an aviation academy for classes because I had a pilot license. Also, I used to work in, I'm like Johnny since I used to work in a juice shop as a juice maker. I used to be a delivery boy. I used to work in as an electrician. I used to work as a cleaner and caretaker to survive. So at that time, my community transgender people helped me to get jobs in juice stalls which was ran by transgender people. At that time I didn't had any hope that I would get back to my career. I only had a single dream, that to survive myself every day. When I left my home, I had a dream that I want to live a single day as me. I want to live in my identity. That was my dream. Then, yeah, I struggled a lot. And at that time, when I used to work in juice stall, my earning was 300 rupees. I have to work. I wake up in the early morning at 5, and then I start working. Then at 1 o'clock, I'll finish the job. Then I have to go to the owner's house and I have to clean their home. I have to work for them. Then I only get few hours to sleep. When to sleep, that's how I survived, and I didn't stop. I found a lot of, met a lot of people, and I talked to them, and luckily I got a chance to be a part of a news. When Abhinandu Varthaman's incident happened, they invited me to talk about it. So I shared my experience as also along with it. So then it went viral, and the government recognized me. Also, for this scholarship, I went several times to the government officers, and finally, they sanctioned my scholarship. And at that time, I didn't had any job. So Anil from Chilla Ananya organization, it is an organization for children of sex workers. So he is the one who took care of me and he gave me shelter, and I stayed there and prepared my documents to join Aviation Academy. So I joined in Rajiv Gandhi Aviation Academy. When we talk about discrimination in uh, uh, educational institute, that academy is a progressive space, but still I got isolated in that academy for revealing my identity. Even though I have visibility, I had two friends in my academy. They're girls. We had only two girls in the academy, so they were my friends. I'm afraid to be friends with cis men, so I'm not comfortable, sorry. At that time, suddenly they stopped talking to me. I didn't know why. And one day, one girl said me that one of my classmates said not to talk to these kind of people. They are not good. They are blah blah blah. That's what they said to my friends. And then they suddenly stopped talking to me. It was recent. It was before 6 months, I think. Yeah. So then I stopped going to the academy for ground classes. I started studying myself. Also, the really bad thing that happened to me was when I applied for medical. I know the case of Myra Bandaliga. She was denied medical for doing hormone therapy and her surgeries. Getting a medical in aviation industry is a really hard thing for even for cis people. So as a trans man, when I applied for my medical, uh, they have a column for transgender, but the thing is that we cannot use it. There is a column, but we cannot use it. So I applied for the medical, and I wrote a letter stating that I am a trans person and I would like to get a class 2 medical. Class 2 medical is the basic one, and we have to get another one, which is class 1 medical to join to start flying in India. So when I came to Bangalore, I got appointment in Bangalore IAM for medicals. When I came to Bangalore, these people were very curious, and they I went through. I was subjected to invisible medical, mental, and physical procedures. For cisgender people, it only costs 6,000, 5,000 to 6,000 rupees for medical tests. For me, it costed around 60,000 rupees for medical tests. And for cis people, it only takes a single day for the medical tests. For me, they made me to stay here for a month. And I'm a person who is struggling to survive every day. So I didn't had any accommodation. So Christy, one of my friend who is staying in Bangalore, he's the one who helped me to stay, find shelter here. So these people made it very really hard. Even though I'm getting a scholarship from the government, they don't provide additional costs like my other expenses. They do provide hostel fees, but it takes years, it takes months to get it sanctioned. So I'm surviving every day by doing this small work. So it was not affordable. Luckily, I got this fund from producer of a documentary producer who did a documentary with it with me. So luckily, I paid that fees and I went through a lot of medical tests, also psychometric tests. For trans people, we have to go through a lot of psychological procedures and tests. They made me to go through a lot of tests, and you know what questions they asked me? They are asking me, like, they were so curious to know about my sexuality, gender, and my organs. They were asking that how I am going to have sex with a girl, and they asked how I am going to get married. Do you get a girl to date? Have you had your surgery? Why are you growing beard? These are the questions asked by a psychiatrist, aviation psychiatrist. And I thought, I know that I'm going to fly the aircraft, and I'm not going to marry the aircraft. They just want to know know my sexuality. And they said after the test, I had no other issues. In spite of the impeccable medical reports, with no clinical indication that endanger aviation safety, they denied my medical certificate. They denied my medical for me undergoing transition. They wrote that I have gender dysphoria. As per WHO's ICD-11, they declassified gender incongruence from diseases. It comes under sexual education part, I think. Yeah, sexual health. And they replaced the term dysphoria, gender dysphoria, to gender incongruence. But still, these doctors, they wrote that I am having gender dysphoria. So they denied my medical certificate, and I went to get it done, and they said me to stop transitioning. The people from IAM, they made me to write a declaration that I won't do transition and I'm going to detransition. I won't do any hormone therapy surgery, and they want me to sign it. Then I called the government, the people in the government, and I asked them what to do. They said just sign it. It's a piece of paper. From that time, I stopped hormone therapy, and I didn't had surgery at that time. And I sacrificed my identity for my career, and I was really screwed up. So then after that, even I we have to apply for to write examination in aviation for pilot training. We have to apply for computer number. I applied for computer number. These people said I cannot grow my beard and I cannot change my documents. And when I applied for computer number, they rejected my computer number because I haven't changed my documents to male or transgender. It was in female identity. And They rejected it because my face looks like a man, and they are quoting it. I was surprised they are quoting it. I have mismatches in my ID, photos, and they rejected it several times again. And I got my scholarship in 2019. Till now, I haven't flown aircraft in India. Also, when I was going through the medical inspection in IAM, they made me to strip all my clothes and they examined. And you know what they said? One day, I was staying in the accommodation and suddenly I got a call at midnight from an Air Force officer. And he said that I want to examine your genitals. It's not official purpose, but I just want to examine. That's what he said. I wanted to share it to, at that time, I was very afraid and I shared it to my friends. Then they said, don't tell anything now because they are going to reject your medical again. So at that time, I didn't share it to anyone. Then I thought, why am I struggling like this? Why should I hide my identity for my career? Then I decided I'm not going to sacrifice my identity for anything. I want both. I want to live with my own identity and I want my career as well. So I talked to the people in the government and they agreed to send me, they promised me that they will send me abroad for my higher education. But I'm not going to stop here. At that time when my medical got denied, Jaina ma'am called me and she asked me whether I need any help. Also, Arvind sir, many people helped me, but at that time I was afraid. Even the government was not ready to take a case or petition, challenge this case because they were also afraid that they thought that I'm going to waste a lot of time going behind the cases. But now I got this opportunity to continue my education. Yeah, thank you. And now I'm going to fight for my rights, not just for my rights. There are a lot of trans people who wish to become pilots, who wish to enter into the aviation industry. So I want to open a door for everybody. If I stop from here, they are going to do it with other people as well. You know what he said when I left the IAM medical center? They said, we don't want to risk 200 people's lives by giving job to these kind of people. That's what they said. They said they asked me to quit this career, and they don't want transgender people to be in aviation. And they also added that you people have many other options. Why are you choosing this profession? And if they give medical to a single person, for me, they are worried that they will have to give it to another people. That they said it to me. And now yeah, I will be going with the cases. I'm going to challenge DGCA in high court. And Chena ma'am promised me that she will assist me with the case. Yeah. So this is the reality of trans people in India. So we have to find solution, and we need a policy for transgender people. Whenever a company hires a transgender person, they should have a policy for trans people. They should make sure that they are paying equal wages and providing equal facilities for transgender people, including medical insurance and other facilities they should provide for trans people. And in aviation as well, we need a proper guideline and policy for transgender people. That's what I dream. That's my wish. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for this platform.
Thank you so much, Adam. For thank you for sharing everything. Yes, we are all fighting to create, safe space for, all the spaces. In the sense, workspace, education, every spaces we need to create a safe space. So that's why we are fighting for create a safe space. And the people, the cis people doesn't know about how to handle the trans persons, and they should, ask us. We are ready to. So as Aksa said, so ask us. We are ready to say, how to handle the trans persons. So I have a question, and Adam, for I will ask, once, um Anindya. So next is you. You can.
Yeah, it's I feel very triggered. I mean, sometimes that word also doesn't sort of catch the intensity of what we feel and what we go through, even listening to many such stories. So anyway, I'll sort of start by talking around the question of the labor force, the status of labor force of transgender persons, um, and these are just some initial thoughts. Sort of also, we're also in, this is also a space where I would like to mark um, a departure from the diversity inclusion portfolios and I mean no disregard, but I'm trying to say is that that is definitely a space that we keep hearing so much about within a certain um, um, within a certain corporate workspace, which is great for many persons. And I think, like, say, when Adam flies, and then we would like to see the company having a policy like that. But I'm really bringing the focus, or trying to bring the focus, onto something that does not um, does not pass to occupy that space, and that is the entire informal space that trans people occupy, the informal labor force that trans people embody. But I want to begin by placing before you some caveats. Firstly, that I am not a person who's a statistician. So, what I'll be presenting before you uh, are my own understanding, having gleaned through a hoard of statistical information, or the lack of it rather, finding gaps, looking through policy documents to locate the absent question on transgender labor. At best, we can say that the statistics, even when present, are not fully either legible or, accessible for trans persons, let alone anyone else. It's not desegregated, it's clubbed together, it's opaque. So there's a lot of difficult navigation of that kind of data set that is presented before us. Um, so a lot of difficulties and challenges are sort of brought forth. So therefore, the world of transgender people and their work in particularly continues to be invisibilized at multiple levels. And this invisibility further obscures the economic role, and the significant barriers remain for trans individuals to enter the world of work or to have access to economic participation. I'm not sort of reiterating the trans participation data that we have from the NHRC study. Um, but I sort of want to sort of present before you certain other things. But I also want to flag this, that having lived through not just one, but rather two pandemics within a span of 2 decades or slightly more, of HIV and COVID, and not that the precarity of trans lives have been um, made any better, um, and we are very, very affected. We have been made aware of the slippery slope of enumeration and data, something that we also spoke about yesterday. Um, you know, especially concerning trans queer lives. And this I speak more from the point of view of the HIV/AIDS history that our communities have had, of being sort of reduced to data sets and terminologies. Um, um, so, yet ironical as it may be, I'm relying on the very idea of enumeration and its lack, the lack of data, to make this presentation. And such are our conundrums. So, very little work has actually analyzed the labor market outcomes of trans individuals, mainly due to this particular lack of data on gender identity in what are nationally representative surveys, which of course hinders empirical analysis. Um, so what we are dealing with is actually little information or absolutely zero data. So while the strategic inclusion of transgender persons is noted in several policy documents, of late, things are sort of moving and shifting in certain directions. Sometimes they are circular, sometimes they are policy documents by national institutions. I'll come there. There is very little information about the uptake of such provisions by the communities. So we are facing a dead policy document, and then we do not know where, if there has been any uptake on that. So I sort of want to sort of go to something which probably is relatable, which is the NREGA, the National Rural Employment Generation um, Act, and there is a specific project within it. So it's very funny. I mean, every time I'm sort of looking through these documents, I do a sort of a search and I do transgender and it says not found. And then you do trans, just do trans. And then you sort of locate words like transparent and transport, etc. And then somewhere because even the search engines can't recognize us. So it's funny. It's really funny. So the NREGA project, which is about livelihoods in full employment, it's called LIFE. How ironical. It is a convergence initiative, and this I'm quoting from the document. It is a convergence initiative to proactively prioritize. No, this is not the slide. If we can go to the slide later, you can take the slide off. This is not the slide. I'll tell you, Mihir. Thanks. So it is a convergence initiative to proactively prioritize willing youth. Okay, from households largely dependent on this particular scheme, NREGA scheme, for livelihood to be supported through skilling programs. So basically, this is a skilling program announcement policy. The project aims at promoting self-reliance and improving the skill base of NREGA workers and transforming them into confident, fully employed, self-sufficient persons and with entrepreneurial entities. Very ironical words. The project will be implemented, and this is the strategy, that it shall identify youth and families that are dependent on NREGA for their livelihood, skill them, improve their livelihood asset base. And here is the point. Youth in the age group of 18 to 35 years, 45 years in case of women, particularly vulnerable tribal groups, persons with disabilities, transgender, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and other special groups from the rural households whose members have completed at least 15 days of work under NREGA in so and so financial year shall be eligible for these livelihood interventions, and priority shall be given, etc. Now the question is, this sounds excellent on paper, but this is just a tiny fraction in the entire scheme that sort of puts just transgender as a within it's comma. The question really is that will skills building lead to guarantee of jobs? Because we've really known how NREGA has failed rural workers in guaranteeing jobs, and we can imagine the upscale, the uphill task that a trans person will have to navigate in order to sort of even get enrolled and um, you know uh, get a job guarantee. I'm reminded of a situation that I encountered, and that's actually got me thinking in this port, in this city, city which has a port in West Bengal called Haldia, which is also a petrochemical hub. And there outside, so my first experience of talking to people like trans persons who have been struggling to get this minimum guarantee of job of work is there actually, where they said that factories are set up, and sometimes contractors come and we get jobs, but then we do not get jobs that are like, that there's no minimum guarantee. It's like what the contractor throws at me, and for which of course there's a whole set of negotiation and compromises that is part of the game. It's accepted. So factories, when factories are set up, trans persons if they're part of that labor force, they would get some job. Sometimes when the job doesn't come, they would sort of open up tea shops and rice hotels outside, and that rice hotel, and those would sort of cater to the labor that is building the factory inside. So there's that limited, and when the factory sort of is functioning, they're out of business. So they're back to sex work. So this is an interesting cycle, and that's quite telling. Um, so there are going to be several surveys, etc. The policy document lists them out. Now, so we need to ask questions to, say, the state rural livelihood missions that are there, that are part of the NREGA scheme. How is this inclusion of trans persons, which is there in the policy document, how does that sort of translate into any real action? Now, let me come to this other aspect, which again, this is something known that happens in this country called the periodic labor force survey. And considering the availability of labor force data at more frequent time intervals, the National Statistical Office, which is the NSO, launched these periodic labor force surveys in April 2017. This is post-NALSA, of course. But interestingly, I mean, among the objectives of this survey, the periodic labor force survey, is to estimate the key employment and unemployment indicators, and these being the worker population ratio, labor force participation rate, unemployment rate, etc. They published 3 annual reports. They're all accessible online, and if you look at them, and if you may just show, this is the data set that is presented. See, now, because I have my challenges with understanding statistics, and if you look at it, if you look at the footnote there, and if you see those dollar signs, how ironical! You see, with male, you have a dollar there, you have a person which has a dollar there. So the dollars includes transgender persons. Now, how on earth are we going to sort of make any sense from this data? Like, we couldn't make any sense from the non-desegregated data from the census that was presented to us. So this is how the data set is presented on trans persons. We are sort of relegated to footnotes. So this is the labor force participation in urban areas, and this sort of covers the period. So if you look at it, you'll see the age range is fairly interesting. There's 15 to 29 years. There's 15 years and above, which is, I don't know how that is presented, and then there is all ages. But we have to make sense from this. This is what we have now, and this is something that we are sort of struggling with, because this is policy. This is what was policy inclusion. This is where we find representation. So here it is. Deal with it. Thank you. If we go to the next slide, Meher, there's a fair. So there's again the next one. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. This one. Yeah. This again has the status in employment. This has the survey period. Again, you'll see the transgender data is sort of calculated within the gender male and persons. So this is what we'll sort of get more or less. Like, if we go moving into the other, no, okay, let's go back. Sorry, but yeah. So I'm very interested. So this is a very detailed labor survey report. You can access it, and if anybody has can sort of unpack the statistics, it would be really helpful for us to sort of understand where we are and what is the sort of representation that is being talked about. So one thing led to the other, and I was very interested in seeing what is the Ministry of Labor and Employment saying about trans persons. And if we can go to that slide, this is just a sort of a, so very clearly it has policies on safety, health, and environment at workplace, which has no mention of trans persons at all. It has a very fancy policy, but it's very wordy and it's quite utopian. But given the fact that we are also faced with the dilution of the labor laws currently in the country, and especially the code, the labor codes, we know what we are sort of facing. And what is interesting here is that this website of the Ministry of Labor and Employment has this big section. If you click there, it's got this national policy on HIV and AIDS. Now, which is very interesting for me, is because once you glean through it within that document, there is no mention of anybody, any trans queer persons. Now, we know for a matter of fact that we have the National AIDS Control Organization, and with all its policies and all the sort of cannibalizing that it has done on trans bodies um, and trans deaths. It's interesting how the ministry sort of would like to pitch, like sort of have complete silence. And there is, of course, then the question of the pathological body of the trans person, and versus the laboring trans body, and both of which are sort of invisibilized, robbing them of its dignity. So, I mean, how do we read what is being presented about us, and more importantly, what is not being presented about us is perhaps the question that we need to ask. And I just want to sort of go to the next sort of block. I have these blocks that I'm sort of barely sort of navigating, because I think those are spaces from where I'm trying to seek some answers. And there could be many more, but this is a space which is basically something known as the Employees Provident Fund, um, which is uh, which is part of the Employees Provident Funds and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, 1952. And then you have the Employee State Insurance Act, which is applicable to non-seasonal manufacturing establishments, other than a mine, etc. Which ESI schemes for India is an integrated social security scheme tailored to provide socioeconomic protection to the workers in the organized sector and their dependents in contingencies such as sickness, maternity, and death or disablement due to an employment injury or occupation. And then there's this the third arm of this block, which is the pension fund, which is around pensions. And if we can sort of look at some of the statistics that that website sort of gives, and this is data from September 2017 to March 2018. The overall period that is there is 2017 to April 2021, and you will see the sort of segregation. You'll see data on male, female, others, and you'll see the kind of numbers that we have. At least there's some numbers and there are some dashes. Um, so there are a number of members that cease subscribing during the period. There are a number of new um, subscribers. There are a number of members who exited. And that's interesting because this is about the Provident Fund provision. So here at least you get some, I mean, if you trust this data, if you want to look at this data, you will see that there is something that you have a handle, you have a grip on. I mean, there's very little that we do. So these are just sort of, when you're drowning and you sort of, there's something that's thrown at you, so sort of clutch at it. It's something like that. So there is, if you can just proceed very quickly, I mean, not just there's very boring things, but like there's something very interesting that appears out of this whole thing. At least this is a space which is marking trans persons in some manner. We have the EPF, we have, please proceed. So I'm interested in how how the numbers are sort of shifting from new subscribers to to people who have ceased subscribing to this to the Provident Fund scheme. What does it mean for people dropping out of those workspaces? What does it mean anything? How are we going to read into this? Um, yeah. Um, I think there's some data around April 2021 post this. Yeah, March. Yeah, there. This is the latest. But if you can move ahead a little bit, this is for the National Pension Scheme again. Uh, a matter of social security for trans persons. What do we have here? We see in the central government. You see what is the figure there? You see, central is zero. State we have speaks a lot, right, for social security for the futures of trans persons. So I mean, this is just these are just things that I felt that we could, if we can just move ahead a little bit more. How much time do Again, this is April 2021 onwards. This is the latest that we have on the website. Now, what is interesting is, therefore, I think, you know what this brings us to question around trans persons is, I mean, of course, questions around wage and question, but what I'm really interested is in the question of collective bargaining, that the power to collectively bargain within the workspace as trans persons. But even before that, I mean, what are we doing about the enormous sense of isolation that trans people face within workspaces, like that you do not have. I mean, some people call it minority stress, but I'm not interested in that word really. I'm interested in just the sheer sense of isolation and bullying and harassment and all of that. And what do these statistics therefore speak to us, and what does it tell us about where trans people, especially those who are part of this invisible informal economy, where do they feature? This is, of course, organized sector data, but like, if this is the organized sector data, where are the trans persons from the informal sector? I'll stop here because I think I've exceeded my time, but I'll take questions if they are coming my way.
Thank you, Anindya. And now, Anubhuti, floor is yours.
Yeah, so a very good afternoon. Is this on?
Yeah.
Yeah, a very good afternoon, everyone who's present here. I have the privilege of actually addressing the the last talk of this entire event. So before I say anything else, this has been one of the most transformative experiences that I've had. Being a trans person, I think this is the first space that I have truly felt comfortable that this is a trans led space. This is a space where trans people hold the cards, be the people who are able to talk, and that actually gives me the privilege of being able to talk at a very very honest level. So I have just to introduce myself, I lead the LGBTQ inclusion at the Tata Group. I started with Tata Steel. That's where I work. My primary job is of a digital strategist. I am chosen as one of the fast track careers. I report directly to the chief information officer, and someday they see me as being the chief information officer, which is at a CXO level. So that is what I am. But coming from there, I want to talk about what does it really mean to have a trans person really integrated into a workspace. Also, what it means is, again, the last speaker advantages is that I get to speak about the futures. Like, what kind of future are we looking at? Um, just a little bit of disclaimer, my talk in a lot of places would be aspirational, would be, a little, geared towards the respectable middle class, corporate, private working person. And that is an aspiration for a lot of people. in the trans community as well as in all communities. So speaking from that point of view, I could have, there is going to be a little bit of, say, criticism of my own employers, and also a little bit of criticism of, say, the queer movement in general from the place that I stand. So my apologies already before I start. The topic that I'm speaking on is nurturing tomorrows and how growth and leadership of trans person at workplaces is essential for the future. Before I begin, let us first talk about why. Why do we need trans people? Why do we need queer people at the workplace, right? And I'm talking from the perspective that is both workplaces centric as well as trans people centric. I have this line that I say all the time is that we live in very queer times. I mean, you're all wearing masks. You know what is happening in the world. We're living in very queer times, and at queer times, we need queer leaders. Let me use a word that is something that if you're doing an MBA, you would have heard of. That we live in a VUCA world. VUCA meaning, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. A lot of corporates are right now first time engaging with a world like this, and they have to lead their people through this kind of turbulence that is there. But we as trans people, we as queer people, for us, our lives have been VUCA. We've had volatility, we have uncertainty, we live in the complexity of our identities, we have a complete ambiguity of where we fit into the different structures that are already created. And we have found a way of coping with that, leading with that, finding our space within that, because we are, we have this high level of personal accountability. We know that most of our actions will be responsible, and we will be responsible for most of our actions, and they're going to affect us quite personally. Secondly, we are like, we know about empathy. Leading with empathy, we create collectives, we create places where we can, really build and co-create things together. As well as, we have hyper, almost anxiety or awareness of complexities that are going on. So if I'm a trans person, I know there is a difficult situation coming up, I'll be extremely aware of what I have to do, and take care. Like mostly, say, people say, if you're traveling as a trans person, you will be extremely aware and plan of every eventualities that goes on. So you are always in that worst case scenario thinking. And these things, these qualities really make queer people and really make trans people the people you need to have at the helm of the organization. I'm not talking within the organization. I'm not talking in economic inclusion. I'm talking about, leading the organizations. Now, coming to that, I wanted to really impress on the, the kind of power that HR or human resources has in this point of time. There's actually this article that came out in Arts and Letters Daily, which talks about HR being the primary central organizing force behind our societies. Let me go a little bit into that. You see, and I'm borrowing a little bit from some discussions we had yesterday, is that we are a democracy of exceptions and the exceptional, right? So while the exceptional happens in the society, the felt reality and the lived reality of a large number of people or in the economic, who are part of the economic workforce are, they experience it through their HR. They experience it through the policies that are there in their workplaces. So, for example, if there is a large scale movement like Me Too, Me Too is going to be something for movie stars and celebrities, and you'll hear a lot about, in the public discussion. But for a general person, where they're going to face it or where they're going to have any interactions with it is in their anti-harassment work policy, which is there at the workplace, right? Similarly, we had a very large push for, say, inclusion of, colored people with the whole Black Lives Matters movement, where you see a lot of companies now coming forward and trying to work for inclusion. And then again, this inclusion is going to be felt as how many people do these companies have from the colored workforce who are going to be, part of it and leading it. So that's the idea that I want to say, is that the exceptional is made mundane by HR, and that's where we experience our world. So the next part I want to come to is the pretty curious case of a trans person fully integrated into their workplace. We heard a lot of stories in which a lot of challenges were presented. That there were so many challenges of just getting access to a workplace, just getting the basic requirements of the workplace. In my experience, I've kind of had the privilege of a lot of these policies, a lot of these changes being able to shape these at my workplace. But the primary reason and the primary driver of it was my visibility. So the primary thing of a trans person at a workplace is visibility, hyper visibility. The whole changes that happened, say in Tata Steel, which is a 100-year-old company, nothing would have happened. And we actually started, I'm trying to refrain from the first, but we actually started the first LGBTQ employee resource group in a manufacturing company in India. It was not even heard of before. We had one of the LGBTQ inclusive policies at a manufacturing workplace, which was again, a large part of the workplace did not believe in. But that's the thing, that these things were possible only because I was visible. And because I was visible and I was determined to stand my ground, I was transitioning at my workplace and trying to make sure, whatever needs that I have and whatever needs I can think of that queer people have are brought into policies, are formulated into the working of the organization. And I was, the way I was using it is that the companies, corporates, especially say you are in Bangalore and this is a primarily corporate driven city, and that this is huge PR material, having trans people at your workplace, having, hiring trans people at your workplace, that is huge PR material. And that's what makes companies go for it. That's what makes them make half baked ideas of, hiring trans people into their organization, having those numbers. So now, while this is done, I knew what the motivation behind it was, and I was consciously using it. To just give an example, I suddenly found myself in a numerous number of publications that were going on at the whole Tata website, the whole group websites, lot of conversations talking about my story, and my story becoming this sort of pioneering event that led a change and things like that. And I could understand why they were happening, and I was consciously using it. For example, one of the biggest examples that I cite in other say forums where it is primarily cishet, for cishet eyes, I talk about how my story was included at the Tata Experiential Center, which is 100-year-old, building, the Bombay House. They created an experiential center of what Tata means to the country, what Tata means to everyone. So along with things like, absolutely historical things like the first ingot of steel that was created in Asia, that was present there in that room. There were letters from Mahatma Gandhi written to J.N. Tata to start an Indian enterprise, and steel was looked at the enterprise that will build the future. This is like pre-independence and everything. So along with these things, these absolutely momentous things, there was my story of a pioneering event in which I transitioned at the workplace, made the workplace change a lot of things about it, made it a lot more inclusive, and the way we speak about things. So all of this was happening, everything was happening, and it was of course extremely emotional for me, but somewhere it was not satisfying. And that's where I'm coming to the next part, that trans people, due to their visibility, also carry the burden of being ideal employees. Like trans persons, because they're extremely visible, they have to be extremely ideal, they have to perform the best, they have to look, they have to, I would say, pass into the cishet ideas of what trans people should be like. So those things are there. And even say back home, my back home meaning in my company, I was still, while I was being so visible and speaking in so many different forums, I think I've done forums all around India, incorporated. While I was doing all that, all this was looked at as a distraction from my first, my day job per se. So while that was there, I realized that hyper visibility without agency doesn't really give us anything, doesn't really make a trans person, able to thrive in a workplace, right? So even in the LGBTQ inclusion front, which I was supposed to be leading, there were my demands which I wanted. There were things which I thought were first priority, that is to have a preferred
Yeah,
name
have to
policy.
move.
People can use preferred name for their communications and genders for their communications. Instead of that, what the company wanted to focus on is, Pride Month celebrations, wanted to focus on, giving equal benefits to same-sex partners as married couples. Knowing the queer community, I am not sure. Like, there are of course exceptions, Vihan, but apart from exceptions, I don't know how many queer people and trans people really fall into that area where they're going to be having partners equal to a married partner, unless of course the rules are already there,
Excuse
unless
me,
of course
excuse
there
me.
is a law against it. Without that, I mean, I know people who change partners. So I wouldn't think that the sheer number
So,
of people who are going to say benefit from this policy is going to be extremely low, and I don't know anyone in my organization who has got it. So then I come to the real crux of the matter here, is that what are trans futures in an organization? What do we look at trans futures and how do we build them? Now, the term trans joy is what we believe is the is essential to bring a silent revolution of having trans people at the workplace. Uh, I think what really determines the success of an inclusion effort, and you might know that a lot of companies are on the diversity and inclusion bandwagon. Everyone wants to include people. But what really determines the success of inclusion effort is to have trans people, or basically marginalized groups, grow in the organization, organically grow in the organization and become leaders. Hiring is very simple. A lot of people hire very easily and at a position where they don't really see a future of the trans people that they're hiring. It's mostly done for the numbers, it is mostly done for the PR activity that it generates, without looking at the future. So the real test is that when we are going to have trans people grow within the organizations, where they are going to be weathering the storms of all this unconscious bias that exists, where they're weathering the storms of qualifications and a largely cis-het dominated and affirming institutions that we have. However, we are also at a very interesting point of, say, the trans inclusion at a workplace, because for the first time ever, and I would really gladly be contradicted at this point, is that for the first time ever, we have this possibility of trans people having the option of choosing a career, having the option of choosing to be a leader at a private enterprise, at a highly economical enterprise. And this is something that actually is aspirational to the middle class, but also it's something that Tori Peters in her book Detransition Baby talks about as the Sex and the City generation of trans people, where trans people, trans women in this case, it is possible to have the upwardly mobile stories that cis women have, where they can choose romance, where they can choose careers, where they can choose for themselves rather than be at the mercy of what organizations give them. I'll come next to the part of what is the advantages of trans inclusion. Like, we talked so much about trans inclusion, but why would corporates do that, and why would trans people want to be part of corporates? That's also a very important thing. Is that I personally believe, and I don't know if you would, but trans and marginalized people are the closest we can get to stargazers and future seers of the society, because there are things, the needs that trans people have today are going to be felt by a lot of cis het people, or whatever people in the future would have. For example, I'll give the example that it's a buzzword now in the tech industry, in all sorts of industry, to have privacy, right? But 5 years back, the social media companies were taking privacy for a toss. There was no privacy, and the primary reason why I believe that was their lookout was because they didn't have people like trans people who have always known about the value of privacy, known about how important privacy is to them. For example, in my own example, Facebook actually outed me to my colleagues before I was ready to come out to them. I had a separate account on Facebook for my congruent to my gender identity, but because of things like people you may know, this was shown to some people in my workplace, and I was basically outed without ever having to ever getting the chance to say my own story. So these are the things like privacy, for example, is one of those things in which trans people can go make decisions. There's also another thing that happens is that there is a very big you can say accountability in organizations today to be on the right side of history, right? So for example, I would take the example of something that happened very recently with Netflix, where a comedian called Dave Chappelle was extremely transphobic. There were trans people in Netflix who tried to, uh, report against it, tried to organize against it, but because they were not in a position of decision making, because they were not powerful enough, they were hardly able to make any difference, and that created that position in which being trans at Netflix now makes you an outlier, now makes you a basically someone who's going to be having a lot of difficulty being proud of your organization, being proud to belong to your organization. So having trans people, having queer people, or marginalized people in decision making positions is what I would say reduce the discontent with the content that you create. And I would say all companies today are content creating companies. I mean, Tata Steel, the way it is seen by everyone else is the content that it creates, including, say, the talk that I'm giving here. It is content that Tata Steel is creating and giving out to people. Right. So this is one of the things, and the third thing is that we are coming to the generation of Gen Z. Gen Z is going to be part of the workplaces now. Gen Z and even generations after that. And I believe that Gen Z is a generation of worktivists. They are going to be activists in all of the transactions and all the interactions that they do. So there is going to be a need to engage in social as well as environmental issues at an individual level. Every employee. Now you can't have just the leader or just the CEO talking about how socially inclusive or how environmentally inclusive an organization is, because every single person of the workforce is going to have an opinion and is going to try and make sure that these opinions are congruent to a progressive future. So looking at Gen Z in mind, it is important that we bring that progressiveness even before Gen Z has come in and come in earnest. So that's where we want trans people, that is where we want marginalized people to lead the initiatives to make sure, because we are, as I said, future seers. We see a lot of things which other people almost have to figure out through their experience. So that's one of the primary reasons why I believe trans people in decision making is the only alternative for the future. I'm not talking just for the sake of trans inclusion. I'm talking about for corporates to function. Now I'll come to how it is to be done. I mean, there's so much to be done, but how do we do it? I'll not go into the specifics of the services that, say, companies believe trans people need. Now, of course, gender neutral washrooms, say coverage of whatever medical expenses trans people might have, and a lot of these basic things, basic services, having an option apart from male and female, these things are very, very basic, and I'll not go into that. I'll really go into that perspective in which organizations need to take trans inclusion with an outcome based policy and outcome based what do you say strategy, rather than point solutions. The point solution generally is that we don't have trans people in our organization, everyone else is hiring trans people, we need some trans people, right? But where is the outcome? And no company, very honestly, does anything without an outcome, without a business outcome that is going to be relevant for them for a very long period of time. Now, these trans people that you're hiring, unless they are going to be helpful for you at a very long period of time, it doesn't make sense to hire them. So that's why I meant that, instead of trying to get your foothold in the PR engine and have half-baked solutions for hiring, it is very important that we nurture them, nurture those tomorrows. Because if we don't do that, it is basically like planting a sapling in an unfertile land. You are going to put that sapling and they're going to either have stunted growth or they're going to die off. And that is not a story that media will cover. Media will cover when you hired them. Media won't cover when they dropped out, or when they were frustrated within the organization. So the way to do that is something that I think Vihan was talking about, is to make sure that there is a constant feedback mechanism just after hiring. What a lot of organizations want to do is that, look, we've given you this, we've given you whatever we could have given. We could have given you gender neutral washrooms, we've given you these policies, look how beautiful our policies are, we've given you all of this, now you are equal to everyone else. And that's the story that they want to portray. That's the way they want to deal with this problem, is that just put the basics in place and then not care, then not have to care. But the implicit issues that trans people have within organizations, because of their visibility, because of this implicit bias that exists, like, you can of course say that there is a huge bias against women already in the organization. Think about how it goes against trans people. Now, giving them the basics, giving their names, preferred gender, preferred names, that doesn't put away this implicit bias, right? So no amount of, all these unconscious bias trainings and workshops that keep happening over corporates all over is going to address that. The only way that it can be addressed is through conscious bias, through making sure that if you are hiring trans people, you are going to know and you're going to check on how they're moving in the organization, how they're growing in the organization, in a constant feedback loop. That if they are facing issues, even ones which they are not very proud to talk about, so creating that safe space where they can talk about the issues that they face, that they're probably falling down in their career, getting stagnant at some point of time. So all of these things are what need to be addressed first, before we go into just purely hiring. Because and it also relates a little bit to the horizontal reservations demands that Grace and the other people were talking about, is because unless we have affirmative action, unless we have conscious bias of putting trans people first in a lot of positions, it is never going to be addressed. And I personally believe that organizations, companies, they already have a lot of bias. You have a Tamilian trying to get another Tamilian getting up in their organization. You have a Bengali who wants more Bengalis to prosper in their organization. So if all these what is called in colleges as phylum, if all these exist, what is wrong with knowing and having a conscious bias of including trans and queer people. So I come to the absolute last part of it. And another thing is that not look at it from a charity perspective, which is where a lot of the companies now look at it. I come to the last part, which is we talked about all that companies can do, but what about trans responsibility, right? So trans people have to learn to take up space as they deserve and not budge from our demands for taking up spaces in leadership as well as responsibility and commitment, because these are things that are valued in organizations. And chiefly, again, in this decision making and co-creation. The mentality that I really want to change is that we hear this a lot, that organizations are them and they are doing things to us, and they are not they're being gatekeepers of us availing services, of availing who we are. I would like to change that to a position of us, because as more trans people get into the workplace, the idea that the mentality they have to have is that it is us now who are going to make the decisions, and we are going to be responsible to make the future of this company, regardless of the I would say the resistances that we face. We are going to face resistance every step of the way, but if we really truly go to that point where we belong and where we feel that this is ours, that is when we can really affect change. And that is also one of the reasons how we are going to nurture tomorrow, is to have more people, have trans people at the workplace, have trans people at the leadership space, and they will be able to understand the needs of the next generation of trans people. I'd like to just end with an example of, say, trans joy at the workplace, which kind of doesn't get talked about a lot, or something like that. We always talk about, how cishet people get to enjoy, share their details of their marriages, their weddings, their children, when they have a children. I In order to do in order to change mindsets a little bit, what I did is that when I got my legal documents changed, I got a huge box of sweets. I took it to my entire floor and I distributed with them, because this for me was a time of great joy. It was for me one of the things that I wanted to celebrate. And if the cishet people do not know what we are trying to celebrate and what makes us happy, it will never we are never going to be equal. We are always going to be the other. So it is getting into that part where we are equal, where we can express our desires, our need for joy, our need for visibility, as well as our need for agency. So that's all I have to
I'm not Grace, Banu. But Grace had to take a flight, so she has left, and you have to bear with me. Thanks. So, thanks for that, Anubhuti. Really kind of a shift from to end on that note, I guess, the conference with the shift with, say, Vihan talking about the hospitals kind of not allowing trans persons in because the other clients would think that this is a place where trans people go to, a place where you almost utopically sell us there's a dream that companies would want trans people enough that they would do all of this. So I'm actually I look forward to this world with you. So thank you for that and the invitation. And all I have to do is moderate the discussion. So the floor is now open. We have, I'm guessing, about 15 minutes in total. So I'm going to take a round of questions and have maybe 3 people ask questions, and we'll have a round of responses. And if there's time, we'll take more, right? 1, 2, and 3. Okay. There and here.
Should I go?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Anindya, on the data, it seems like the 0 was an improvement from the footnote. And I was wondering. Sorry, I didn't mean that in this. I mean, that's the reality. So I was wondering if you had a sense of why the pension data was more inclusive or better organized, that it wasn't just a footnote.
I did have a related question to the data because as researchers, we do rely on government data no matter how skewed they may be. And I was just wondering, similar to that question, right? That you do depend on employers to kind of collect this data. The state depends on the employers. And then visibility before the employers is what would determine how the statistics present themselves. So when you don't want to be visible to your employers, when certain people would not choose to be visible to their employers, how do you then counter because yesterday one of the panelists mentioned that NDAs or confidentiality agreements is something that can be taken forward with employers. How do you harmonize not wanting to be visible with your employers and then also having corresponding data with state? Thank you.
Hi, good day, everybody. My name is Gopinath Sridhar. Uh, it's regarding to the Air India one. It is supposed to be equal opportunity employer, which is very consistent with the fundamental rights of a constitution, specifically Article 14. And companies can have their policies customized, but the core of it should be from the statutory policies, that is from the laws. You cannot deny them. And coming to that medical part of that thing, there has to be some SOPs, standard operating procedures. It can't be arbitrary because once it becomes arbitrary, you're prone for uh, harassment. And that is what has happened to you. And it is a very fit case to be argued in the court. I hope Jaina takes it up very seriously.
Okay. Okay. Last then. Last there. Oh, we have not. Okay then. Clearly, I have no power.
So I would just like to express my thoughts again. The last one, I think so. One of the last session was in there, but that caught my eyes. So I would like to speak about that. That is regarding prevention of sexual harassment at the workplace, POSH. I know that the speaker isn't there, but I think so. This is something which has to be addressed, and anybody can take it. And it's also regarding, a trans man. So any trans man, if they would give their inputs, I would be thankful to them as well. So the first and the most important thing which I want to ask here is why Posh has complainant only as a woman? So why trans man cannot file a complaint under Posh? Because I know a person who was sexually assaulted and was denied justice because they identified as trans man. So that is the first and the most important question I would like to ask. And then I think so. We all are talking about inclusion and then, workplace inclusion and all that. So it's a very good thing. Respect would follow if we take all these things, we would try to implement it. But that was the only question, and I think so the redressal mechanism and all, it has to, it's just there, people talk about it, but it's not practiced properly. Where I was giving the example, uh, that the person was denied justice, later on they had to take the case back, because the opposite person, the abuser, the survivor, was not as strong as the abuser was. So I just want someone to answer this for me. Thank you.
We have an interesting. We have. अच्छा ठीक है.
Hi, I'm still framing my question in my head while I'm speaking, so please forgive my um, language per se. So I'm primarily looking at value alignment when it comes to work, choosing to work in certain organizations or entities per se, because there are, like, primarily when we look at corporates, there are corporates where at the heart of the organization is exploitation. So how do we do this value alignment with these entities per se? So so yeah, so that is my, and then again, this is something I'm this is just an observation, a very cursory observation, that it is somehow easy for organizations to understand gender, sexuality primarily, not exactly gender also. And but when it comes to Adivasi tribal concerns or Dalit communities, it becomes really, really difficult for them to grasp it. So then how do we do this value alignment there?
So rather, it's not more of a question, but just a lot of observations, and I can take your question as well. Because I work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, and I think it's very important. Representation is very important, right? So something that I think when it comes to inclusion of LGBT or specifically trans inclusion, a lot of corporates immediately, like you mentioned, jump into hiring, right? So the question we always ask is, what makes you think that you already don't have LGBT or trans people in your workforce, right? So you have to rethink what your strategy is. So I do have a observation on what you said, like in terms of prioritizing self-identity, giving an avenue to kind of state your chosen name and pronouns, as opposed to whether giving same-sex partners was more priority. I don't think it's either or, because you anyway have this population. So there are studies in India that show that um, if you take any given population, right, 5 to 8% of that is LGBT. Now, when an organization that houses 1,000 people or 10,000 people, take 5 to 8% of that population, and that is your LGBT population, right? So where you need to start from is making sure that whatever existing policies and benefits you have, you are making it inclusive of LGBT people, right? So whether it is your sexual anti-harassment policies, and over here, corporates have the advantage of doing that, as long, because the law, as per law, since you mentioned, POSH only refers to cisgender women, right? But with corporates, they uh, I think in one particular case it has in Delhi, right? Yeah. Yeah. So, but what corporates can do is that as long as you're in adherence with this law, that you have your ICC constituted, you have, in terms of representation, you have 80% women, and then you have, there is a body constitute that is given. You can still, nothing stops you from extending it to LGBT people, right? And that's what a lot of corporates do. They make it gender neutral, right? But the conversations right now is to make sure that the people on the ICC also have representation from the community, right? And this is not just specific to LGBT people, but for people with disabilities, right? Because a lot of us know that when it comes to sexual harassment, it's more of a power play over there, right? That causes it. So to understand the nuances of it and be able to represent it from that standpoint, if you don't have representation from the trans community or the LGBT community, make sure that your ICC members are well aware of the nuances and are trained in that, right? And there are many people in India who can do these trainings as well. That is one way. So in the case of your friend, for that matter, might be the company that they're working with is not inclusive. They're posh. Um, they're, they're anti-harass. Is it inclusive? Okay, and has that person's and still they didn't do it. Like they didn't address the person's. Sure. So I think that's something that we can perhaps go to court with, right? If the person. Because POSH doesn't, because this person has changed their gender markers to male. Got it. Yeah. So unfortunately, I think that's a conversation we can have with Jenna as well, because per law, I think the the law does not is not inclusive of men, not just men, cis men also, right? So so that is, I think that's the grounds under which that would have been quashed. But I would say culture building in organizations, right? And to even Christie's point, it's not just specific to trans or LGBT people. To so a lot of focus areas in the DNI space primarily talk about gender, and when they talk about gender, it's women that they mean there, and then disability, and then LGBT. But why don't we look at it from a culture standpoint? Religion and culture should be one focus area, because in every corporate you have people from diverse backgrounds from different parts of India, and to understand, even Dalit, Adivasi, or how to kind of include employees from different communities is something that I think those are the conversations needed to be had. But again, it's just moving. I think it's good that a conversation is starting, and we so I'm someone, I'd like to share that, right? I have 12 years of work experience in the corporate space, right? And it's only in the last 2 years that I've been my authentic self in the workplace now, which means that in when I decided to legally and medical transition, I had to quit my job, which is the case of a lot of trans people, because our organizations didn't have gender affirmation surgeries covered. It wasn't inclusive, so we couldn't come out, right? So I had to take a 2-year break, complete my legal and medical transition, and then look for a job from start, which became very difficult, because the moment you have a gap in your resume, you know that the first thing the recruiter looks at is that gap and asks what happened here, right? And over there, you're risking outing yourself when you say that you took this gap to transition. So I had to join an employer which, although they had LGBT inclusion on their DNI focus area, they weren't inclusive, right? So and I kept my identity a secret. But everyone found out I was a trans person because of a lot of media reports about the advocacy work I did. So see, there were senior leaders who would make fun about me when I passed by, saying, "Look at that bearded. You see that bearded guy? He studied in a girls' college. Do you know why?" Right? And I was constantly assessed and analyzed based on the fact that I'm a trans person, and they had no regard to the work or what I contributed to the workplace, right? So it became very difficult to survive in the organization. So my point being that culture building, right? It's not enough to kind of start the conversation at hiring, but start from the stance that you already have people in the workforce, and how are you kind of protecting them and enabling them to thrive and succeed in the workplace is, I think that's the stance from which this conversation should start.
I'm going to actually, sorry, use my moderator privilege to not take a question. You can maybe take it in the lunch break and offer the panelists to.
Well, this is the last question.
Okay,
I am
sure.
quite attracted to the term that role to be played as a leader. I had a little bit doubt, because we have to be emerge as a leader. We should have some platform. It is a question of creation of a platform. That platform, and it should attract the common people or the people of the mainstream. That means we should be more creative and constructive in that respect. In what way you can make the vision? Simply just making the hypothesis and saying that we can do like that, we can call our giant co-brothers to join with us. No, it's really impossible. That in the competitive world with so many critical things for the leadership quality, how can any millions are there? We have to think about it. Either to change the system, either to create the system, or to just reform the system. So many questions will arise. That is why just I am expecting some good answer from your side.
Yeah, we go Anindya, then I would, sorry.
So I really do not know why the zero seemed like I mean, better than the footnote. See, I mean, I see this. These were just. This is just. I mean, I presented only some data sets. There are a lot more. There's a lot more to look at and perhaps make sense of. And I think that is a difficult task. I mean, what task is not difficult for so many of us? But I think it is a task that we need to engage with. Looking at what is being presented about us, and also. Like, for example, there is as part of the new labor provisions acts, so there are a number of forms that employers need to kind of, not just employers, factories, workspaces, they need to fill in and sort of send. And there are guidelines around that and how you need to do it. So, for example, there is this one instance of there is this Form D, which is part of the in the context of labor law compliance that employers need to fill up, which is under the Equal Remuneration Act and its corresponding rules. So it essentially requires employers to maintain a register of workers with details pertaining to their remuneration and and corresponding personal information, which includes gender. Now, a great deal of confusion is there because Form D only provides for 2 columns. I mean, classic case. So employers don't know where to put trans persons if they have any at all. So the Form D does not make any provision. So there are loops that we are constantly encountering, even when so to understand why some data is not present, why some data is there. So I really do not know. I'm just thankful that the pension schemes are presenting this data in the public domain for us to access and make sense of. And to the question around how do we harmonize, with the need to remain invisible. I mean, I don't know if I can answer this, but I mean, I'm just going to sort of draw an analogy to something that I have often told some of my lovers, which is like, don't treat me as part of this trophy room that you have. And I think that's something that I will also tell, sort of make to the. So if for a trans person they wish to remain invisible, I think we need to prioritize. We need to really acknowledge that need and not make it as part of some data crunching device that we all need to lend ourselves, because the burden shouldn't really be put on trans persons, is what I will sort of say. Thanks.
Thank you, sir, for telling me to go for a court to get justice. Thank you so much. I'm actually planning to submit guidelines from different countries who have transgender people's policy in aviation industry. I have already submitted the guidelines of FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, to DGCA, but they are not ready to accept even this new guideline, and they are not ready to form a new guideline in India. Their response was, they said, they have to monitor me for 5 years, and in the meantime I won't I won't be able to fly in India. So I'm going to waste 5 years if they are forming new guideline. So I'll be sharing this as also while sharing all the case details with Jena. And yeah, that's it.
Hi. So I take 3 questions, I think, which were like directed to me. So the first one I would take is from Christy, which was basically about how do we have this value alignment with the corporates that we are working with, because corporates, as we know, a lot of them are built on exploitation. So the whole idea is that the structures of corporate are already built on that. But the advantage that we have at this generation, and again, I'd like to hark to the Generation Z, which is probably the generation after me, is that this is probably the first generation that doesn't have that colonial hangover that we've had for all the generations before. It reduces a little bit every time, but this is probably the time where that colonial hangover is finally going away. And that's why I talked about people who are going to be worktivists. And when worktivists are going to be in the organization, and again, this can only change through representation. You can't bring out a law to have this, right? So it can only change through representation of marginalized communities within this organization and reform them from within, reform the practices that they're doing. So if I'm talking about a marginalized community like trans people, the whole structure was created in a way that it would not be feasible for trans people to have a value alignment there, right? Because they're going to be misgendered, because they're going to be exploited. But being part of these organizations, we got a chance to modify this, to change this. So of course the start would be representation, and the second thing which I was talking about is to have people in those decision making areas, not just facile representation. So that is how I would say that value alignment can begin. I wouldn't say that we'll get organizations which are already absolutely congruent to our values. If those organizations exist, I mean, I think all of us would be employed there, right? But since we are not, and since the reality is what it is, so we have to make that change and start with representation. The next question I take is from Sir there, which is basically talking about, when, say, I talked about queer leaders are needed for this queer generation. So just making a statement like that is not enough. What about the, what about the existing structures that we have, like leadership ability and things like that determine who gets up? Now, I would like you to question that these structures that already exist in organizations, on who they choose their leaders, aren't they the ones who are selecting primarily, cis het men to be leading organizations? Aren't those the structures? Aren't those the metrics that are the reason for this problem? So if we can identify that this is the problem, and the data that trans people can lead and what trans leadership really means, like, if that data is not there, I mean, we can take examples of people like, say, Vikuram and other leadership places where they are able to lead large changes in a slightly different format from the corporate formats, right? But because we know trans leadership exists, and we can take that data, we can understand what trans leadership is like, and put it in our systems. Make sure that you don't follow the age old practices. Like, it's something very simple that happens in organizations is that first thing that you look at is kya qualification hai, kahan se padhai kiya hai, kaun sa, I'm sorry, I went into Hindi, I'm going to back to English. So like, where have they studied from, what is their qualification, do they have an MBA? So all of this, how aligned it is to our goals. So all of this is what goes into choosing a leader, right? Also, again, I talked about biases, where whether they belong to our own community, and would we be able to choose them as leadership, would we be able to trust them as people? So this is how it is done today, right? So, and if anyone here believes that that is the right way to do it, then I would encourage those organizations to continue that. But the reason I believe that it is not the right way to do it, the reason I believe that queer leadership is essential for organizations to be prepared for what Christy mentioned, is that to have value alignment, to have organizations which are going to be congruent to the values that we hold, that future generation holds, that the anti-colonial world holds. In order to have that, it is necessary we break those structures, and breaking those structures starts with making that claim that queer leaders are for for this queer world, this entirely extremely difficult world. Because what we knew from COVID is that no one is in charge, no one really knows what's going on, right? So why do we still believe those structures that made those leaders in charge? So that's my answer to it. The third one from Vihan was the question about why say self-identification, why I said self-identification might have a slight more priority over, say, partner benefits. The reason I look at it that way is because self-identification is something that determines every single interaction that you do. I'll give you an example. There was a project, a very prestigious project in my own organization, with a consultant which I was chosen to be part of. All I had to do is to send them a mail. Send them a mail that I am part of this, and let us meet up and do this. What I did is that I did not send that mail, because my name was my dead name, basically. I would not send it to them. I dithered, I stopped, I thought everything, and the opportunity walked away. So that is the kind of effect that it has in every single interaction. Partner benefits, it is very nice to have that feeling of equality, that my partner is covered as much, my company cares as much for me. That's a very nice feeling to have. But if I cannot even do that interaction because of the issues that I'm facing, I think that deserves priority, that in order to deliver the services that I'm supposed to do, deliver the work that I'm supposed to do, if I'm not able to do that, then if that takes a back seat, then it doesn't really help me, it doesn't really help the other person in the organization who's also facing a similar problem. So yeah, that's my answer to the questions. I don't know if I missed any.
Okay. I just want to, because I'm on an ICC at the District Magistrate's Office in South Delhi. I want to say that women, we have to look towards the feminist movement that created the Sexual Harassment Code. And it was drafted, the work began in 1970s by a very important book written by Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin called Sexual Harassment at the Workplace. At that time, the conversation on sexual harassment remained between men and women. It has a very clear theory of power at its base, which is that men oppress women. McKinnon continues to teach at Harvard, is one of the most revolutionary writers that we know. But the work of creating an inclusive sexual harassment code cannot mean add trans people and stir. Because what we need now is a new theory of power. We do not have one. I do not know between a conversation between trans men and trans women who's more powerful. And this is also a problem because, unfortunately, with Me Too, what has happened, I'm sorry, what has happened is that it has become about correcting behaviors. The Vishaka guidelines clearly say that sexual harassment is about a hostile workspace, right? And so what, and I am on an ICC, so I accept this as a part of the work I do, is that I'm able to say that you can say suspend this person, or you can say you need to recompense this person, but I cannot say people at the workplace should have a right to unionize. I can change behavior of men or women, but I cannot change the company's codes. I cannot change the workplace. I can change sexuality at the workplace, right? And there is a real problem in imagining that sexual harassment is about sexual behavior rather than about hostile workspaces. And I feel like, and especially if, as Anindya's data shows us, if trans people aren't even at the workplace, what are we really talking about? Because in some sense, and this is ridiculous, because on the one hand we think that because trans people are not at the workplace, we're not generating value, but trans people remain the most exploited underbelly of the world, right? We are creating, I mean, Grace, again, I mean, if we're talking about leadership, the missing chair at this point, right? Grace is really important and remarkable understanding that as long as I'm paying the GST and I'm paying your taxes, I am creating value for this government, right? And so, and that value is being generated from exploitative labor. That value is being generated by homeless people. That value is being generated in the face of police violence, right? And so it's quite, it's humbling at the same moment as we hear Anubhuti's dreams, to remember that actually the many people in this room are not here because they're doing sex work at this very moment, right? And that is generating a certain kind of value. So clearly value generation is not what is going to help us in the trans struggle, right? And maybe that is why as an homage to the person who was chairing this chair, I have to say that if we are looking towards leadership to take these questions forward, it has to be Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi, disabled. It will not be Savarna people. It will not be able-bodied people. It will not be neurotypical people. And that is why, and to do Grace's work, it's really important that we have to stand behind, as the trans community did when the Trans Act came out. We have to stand behind the demand for horizontal reservations right now and challenge the OBC bill and say that no place, not just workplaces, no places that we share are actually any way even trans friendly if our Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi, disabled sisters and brothers and comrades and friends are not in the room, as they often are not. And so to that, I think Jai Bhim, and I'll hand it over to Jenna maybe to conclude the.
Thank you so much for an amazing conference. The last panel, and I think really VQ summed it up, that if we have to talk about leadership, the leadership cannot just be queer trans leadership, which Anubhuti started with, but has to be leadership of trans, queer, Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi, disabled people. And I think that's really the work of CLPR. I mean, our work has always aimed at looking to addressing equality for the most vulnerable, and trans rights therefore plays a crucial part in that work, as does the work of disability rights and Dalit Adivasi rights, and these are all integrated. And really, that's what this conference has taught us. It's not that you can take up trans rights one day and just say that, well, you stand for trans rights. No, you stand for human rights, and these are integrated. So really, I think one of the things we thought of when we started Transform 5 years ago. It was an idea that one of our funders, FNF, proposed to us, that why don't you do something on trans rights? And we thought of having Transform as a space that would lead to, that would bring transgender rights and the law mainstream, because there was, of course, trans activism in a big way, but the question of the law was not shaped very strongly. I mean, legal kind of questions. So we wanted a space where constitutional law could engage with trans rights, and the legal system could take up some of these issues. We wanted a space to build conversations on emerging questions of trans rights that give visibility to trans issues and give visibility to trans activists and leaders, and really have the questions shaped by people leading the struggle. And also, bring these issues mainstream. These are not issues somewhere in the corner that just some groups discuss. These are mainstream issues, because I think these mainstream issues, unless they're mainstream issues, they will not, I think, lead our questions on equality forward. And that really was the attempt to start Transform. And I think it's really great to see year on year, and this year especially, that the debates have been as thought-provoking, as exciting, and panels have been amazing. We always get some amazing people from the amazing speakers to our regulars. We have, I don't know whether you can see, but there are regulars from Bangalore and in other places who come. And we also get a great sprinkling of newcomers every time. Young students, young people who follow Transform, and a lot of you don't know, they follow you, they follow your work, they follow the presentations you make at Transform and come for it, and wait to come for it. So Transform kind of has led to that, to being that space, and really being a safe space where all these issues can be so personally shared, and we've seen that. So thank you for making the space your own, really. And so finally, I would like to say that this year we planned something different. We said that, I've been planning with India for a long time. We never materialized it, but we hope that after this Transform, we will try and bring out a collection of writing from some of the speakers and some others as well. And we hope that some of this work can really shape, or really actually contribute to some of the writing on trans rights in the country, which we haven't. So I hope that after this, maybe by mid 2022, or at least by end of 2022, we will have something that will speak for the 5 years of Transform. So thank you very much.
No, we can't say thank you like this. I have to, I'm sorry, Jenna, I have to, as part of leadership, we have to thank you for organizing this, for opening this space up, for just fronting the conversation. I think you really led it in very nuanced ways. You've led this conversation together, and I feel I can speak for at least some of us that we felt supported in this. We felt like we had the space to be the mic and be our irreverent selves. So we really want to thank you, and we really want to thank CLPR for really moving the conversation on trans rights, which I've seen in the last kind of decade move at a remarkable pace in the last 5 years because of Transform and the amazing work CLPR is doing. So I just wonder if we can all join in a round of applause for everyone at CLPR, especially Jenna, for doing this for us. So thank you everyone at CLPR. Lunch!